Hello everyone, my name is Ayush Ratan and I'm starting my new channel which is about informative education content. So it would be really great if you left a like on the video, subscribed and also left your comments in the feedback, in the comments. And that way I can get better with time. So I hope you can do that. It would mean a lot to me. So today we are going to be actually looking at approaches to study Indian foreign policy. So we all know about foreign policy, but in very general terms usually. So today we are going to dive deeper in a bit more detail. And after this, you would know, have a very strong base on what foreign policy is, how it is made, what are the factors that determine it. So the first and the most important point is what is a foreign policy? So foreign policy is about how we maintain relations with others. So if we take an example, of our own lives, own houses. So we have our own house, own family, and then we have neighbors. Or if we are living in a society, there are some people who are not our neighbors, they're far away. But because we live in the same society, we are maintaining relations with them. Because somewhere or the other, it does benefit us. It does benefit us to have friendly relations and connections with these people. Now, put this same thing to a nation. A nation is somebody's home, some people's home. And these nations have neighbors and people who are living a little far away. So, for example, if you say India, India has neighbors like Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. But there are also countries like USA who are not neighbors, they are far away. But maintaining good relations with them is very necessary for us. And this is what foreign policy precisely does. It talks about what kind of relations and how we will actually approach the relations with other nations. But beyond other nations, there are also international organizations like UN, WHO, World Bank, IMF. How are we going to maintain relations with these organizations as well? And how we are going to tackle global issues? So if we see India's approach to nuclear weapons, India's approach to climate change is very different from that of USA's approach to climate change and nuclear weapons. All this is actually determined by a country's foreign policy mechanism, how they think, what are in their national interest, and that's how a policy is made and implemented. And foreign policy uses a lot of tools to actually carry out the work. So there is diplomacy. These are diplomats who actually go out, build relations with other diplomats, other leaders. When diplomacy fails, there is wars and peace talks and all of these attacks that we see. So, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war, it's been very long, but it is a foreign policy tool. Russia had certain foreign policy goals in mind, certain national interests in mind, and thus went ahead with the attack on Ukraine. So when diplomacy fails, people tend to move towards more violent means. But there are also other things like trades, treaties, and negotiations that happen, which are done by diplomats again. But trades, treaties actually strengthen the relation, make it more formal. And India's foreign policy is actually very diverse. It has evolved over time. And every country's foreign policy evolves. But India's foreign policy is very unique in the sense that India has had a lot of challenges throughout its independent history. And also, India is a very vast nation with a lot of cultural diversity, with a lot of different political ideologies working within. So, India's foreign policy scenario is actually, I would say, quite complicated in that sense. And we'll discuss how. So, why do we need different approaches to foreign policy? So, what is a different approach, first of all? So, we have cell phones. Now, if I put a cell phone in front of you, a cell phone is something that is very diverse. It can do a lot of tasks. It has a lot of features within it. But two people may look at the same cell phone differently. So someone may say that this cell phone is ruining the youth because they are all day busy on their phones. But someone may say no, this cell phone is actually making the youth more aware. It's actually making them technologically advanced. It's giving them new opportunities. So same cell phone, but different ways to look at it. Similarly, in foreign policy, there are very different ways to look at the same policy, same events. Like how we said, India looks at nuclear policy, India looks at climate change differently than US and Europe. And these approaches actually provide us the lens into why a country is thinking in a certain way, why certain issues are being interpreted differently in different nations, in different governments. And it also helps us understand the changes in foreign policy, why it's happening, or what changes are needed. And if you see India, for example, we started off as a non-aligned nation, and gradually we have come today to a multi-aligned nation. Non-alignment was when we said we will not go ahead and come in full support of any nation. We will maintain good relations with everyone. But today, that aspect has changed. We say that we will maintain good relations with everyone, but we'll take it a step beyond. We'll also do defense cooperation, military exercises, we'll sign many agreements and other things. And if we see India, India is a civilizational nation. This is a term you must have heard for a long time. India's existence as a nation, the ideas that govern India, have existed for hundreds and hundreds and, in fact, thousands of years. India is a very old civilizational state, and it does actually impact the way we make foreign policy. So, if we see from Buddha to Gandhi, the idea of peace and coexistence was very important to them, and these are figures that are very important in Indian history, and their ideas do impact Indian foreign policy. So if you see, a lot of prime ministers have actually gone out there and used Gandhi or Buddha in their speeches, in their approaches to actually kind of deal with situations or deal with nations. And there have been other factors as well. So the colonial period. In the colonial period, when the British came, took over India, they had suppressed all our freedoms. They had taken away everything from us. So very naturally, India's policy turned out to be anti-imperialist, anti-colonialism. So India supported the freedom of other nations. When India was independent, India's fight for freedom did not stop there. The Indian leaders, the Indian public, the Indian uh, state machinery actually supported other states that were under colonial rule and demanded that they be freed from this colonial slavery that they were going through. And this was a major part of Indian foreign policy. The freedom movement also, as we said, leaders like Gandhi and other leaders as well influenced what India's foreign policy would be. We were someone that believed in the idea of peace. We were someone that believed in the idea of freedom. Our national movement was based on the ideas of freedom and peace and better livelihood for the people. And if you see Indian foreign policy, it actually takes all of this into account while considering how to deal with world issues. And the other factors are the leadership, the kind of bureaucracy you have, the kind of political leadership you have. So if you see uh, the first Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru, while there were aspects of realism, he was a very idealistic, I would say, Prime Minister in the sense that he believed. So, for example, his approach to China was very idealistic. He believed that India and China could actually coexist without conflict, and he did make very honest attempts towards that. But then, if you see in sharp contrast to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she was a more assertive prime minister when it came to foreign policy. She did not shy away from conflict. Similarly, other leaders as well, they bring in their aspect. Now, every leader has a good aspect and a bad aspect. So, if you see Pandit Nehru's policy of non-alignment, it provided India some form of leadership in the third world countries, as we say. Today, we call it Global South. It provided India some form of leadership, even though India was not very powerful. So there are good and bad aspects to every leader's foreign policy thinking. In fact, to every aspect there is good and bad. And sorry. So you can see there are different factors, different approaches that actually uh, influence what foreign policy is. And these are historical approaches that we just studied, that how history has shaped what kind of foreign policy we'll have. But this is not one factor alone that shapes foreign policy. There are different factors. India is very vast. India as a country is very vast, both in terms of size, in terms of population, in terms of diversity, in terms of resources, in terms of needs. India is vast. And so, foreign policy, why do we maintain relations with certain nations? Why is it important for us to have good relations with US or Europe? It's not just for the sake of having relations that, oh, we are friends, but we expect something in return. So do they. Foreign policy is always a give and take. Usually in India, we have this misconception that Russia is our best friend and Russia does everything for us. They are such a nice nation. But if tomorrow the destruction of India is in Russia's national interest, that's what their foreign policy will become. That's far-fetched. I'm not saying that is going to happen, but I'm just giving an example that it can go to that extreme. For every nation, including India, it is about survival, it is about getting better. And so foreign policy's entire idea is to actually bring progress to the nation. So the reason why India is maintaining good relations with US, Europe, Japan, etc. is so that it can get investment, so that it can get technology, so that its diaspora, that are the Indian people, can go to foreign work. That way, our economy grows. We are more safe in terms of internal security. We are more advanced technologically. We have a stronger military if we have defense ties with other nations who can provide us advanced weapons. So everything is about give and take. And India, being a vast nation, actually needs a very unique foreign policy. And we do have a very unique foreign policy because we have to cater to so many demands, so many ideas, so many needs of the nation. So, yeah, the whole point here was to actually remember how vast India is and how our desires and needs are so much. And also, second, foreign policy is always about give and take. It's never about friendships. It's for the sake of saying that we are close friends, natural friends, but everything is about interest. If some country needs something with you, they will sing this song of being your best friend. And the day they don't need you, and the day you become a threat to them, that same country that sang of songs of friendship for you will actually wait for your decline and downfall. So these two factors are also very important for us to remember when we see foreign policy. Now there is geopolitical approaches. We did historical approaches. Now we do geopolitical approaches. So what is geopolitical approaches? Geo, as the word geo suggests, geography. So how our geographical placement actually decides our foreign policy. So you may have the best relations with US, Europe, Japan. They may be investing everything in your country, giving you all the technology. But you cannot ignore your geography. You cannot ignore your neighborhood or surrounding the country surrounding your neighborhood. As our Prime Minister once had told, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that you cannot change your neighborhood. There was a whole quote, but the whole idea that he gave was you can do anything you want, but your neighborhood will always remain the same. You cannot change your geography. And that is so true. Our borders with Pakistan, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh cannot change. They will remain our neighbors. And so, whenever we make policies, we have to keep these nations in mind. So, if we see Pakistan and China, they are hostile to India for the most part. So, Indian foreign policy has to keep that in mind, that how do we tackle these nations? How do we approach it in a way that our country is safe? Because what is the point of foreign policy? To keep your country safe. Please ignore the background noises. Um, to keep your country safe. And then we have nations like Nepal, Bhutan, with whom we have good relations for the most part. Bangladesh, we have had good relations for the most part. Right now, these relations are strained, but there is threat of cross-border terrorism. Myanmar, again, not an anti-India nation, but not a very strong nation that can actually take care of its all entire boundaries, because a lot of terrorist groups actually function out of Myanmar, because Myanmar borders northeast, and a lot of militant activities actually happen from Myanmar borders. So India has to keep all this in mind while making its policies. India has to make sure that the government of Myanmar is actually in support of India, and it understands India's needs and requirements, because India has to carry out operations beyond our borders to secure our own borders, you know. So our security forces have to enter into Myanmar either through drones or sending our soldiers in to actually tackle these groups that function out of Myanmar. And so it is important for us to have a policy that ensures that Myanmar as a nation has good relations with us. Again, another geographical factor is Indian Ocean. India has a very long coastline, and in fact, Indian Ocean is the only ocean in the world named after a country. As the name suggests, Indian Ocean, named after India. And this is India's backyard. A big coastal boundary of India actually is in the Indian Ocean, is in the waters. And so it is very important for India to maintain good relations with the nations around here. Our navy is strong. Our navy does give India a good amount of influence in this region. But it is never enough. You have to ensure that the nations like Maldives, Mauritius, Sri Lanka that are there in these regions actually are friendly towards India and not hostile towards India. So our policy again has to cater to that. We have a policy called Neighborhood First. Neighborhood First policy simply says that whatever happens, whatever our neighbors need, we will give preference to them. Because if we do not have good relations, we do not have a goodwill in our neighborhood, they could cause problems for us in the future. And the whole point of foreign policy is to minimize these problems. So if they need financial assistance or if they need security assistance, India will actually always proactively support them. And this is all done so that internally India can be safe. India's boundaries and borders can be safe. India also has to keep in mind its close proximity to West Asia. West Asia is Middle East, popularly known as Middle East. Then Central Asia, countries like Tajikistan and others. Southeast Asia, countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, because these are in very close proximity to India. India has to make sure that the relations with these nations are not strained. Because if we have good relations with them, if we cooperate with them, it actually strengthens us as a nation. It actually guarantees our progress in the future. But on the other hand, if there is hostility, if we are not cooperating, if there is no friendly relations, India has so much more worries. India has to spend so much more on defense, so much more on other areas instead of economic growth. So instead of progress, India will have to spend in other places that no nation likes to. So it is very important for us to maintain friendly relations with these nations. If we see two examples, China and Pakistan, simply because these nations have a very hostile relation to us, we have to put in so much resources there in terms of defense budget, in terms of manpower. Our soldiers who are working day and night have to be put into these risky areas and actually put their life on the line simply because we don't have good relations with these nations. But if we had good relations with this nation, this whole expenditure, this whole, especially this whole use of manpower, risking our brave soldiers would not really be required because, well, we have good relations with them. So, in that sense, it's very important to have good relations with as many nations as you can. Now, if we see strategic approach, this is the third approach that we'll be studying. India's national security is central to its foreign policy. So, if the Indian policymakers were to choose between economic progress and national security, however, in today's term, economic growth is also a part of national security. But if we see the traditional lens of national security, it's about military power, defense partnership, intelligence, intelligence gathering to see what threats we face internally and externally. I'm sorry, and to be prepared for these threats. And this is the traditional definition of national security. And India's policy very much takes this into account. It has always been a center of uh, Indian foreign policy, Indian approach. India's relations with other nations does keep in mind that how good this is for our national security. And India's a India's military is very strong, very capable. But India's defense industry is not that capable. If we see, it took us very long to produce a fighter jet, that was the Tejas fighter jet. Most of our programs are actually delayed or we are very far behind other nations. So then it becomes very important for us to build defense partnerships with other nations. So we have taken Rafales from France, we have taken missiles from Russia, we have taken drones and helicopters, and we are in deals for taking drones and helicopters and other things from US. So we have defense cooperation with different nations so that our military that is capable, that is well manned, can actually have an edge if it ever comes to protecting the borders. And our intelligence is strong, but we need to build relations with other intelligence agencies to ensure we are more aware and more prepared for what is to come. So India's relation with US, if you take for example, does have a very strong defense and intelligence angle to it. Similarly with Russia. So this is another important factor that our foreign policy makers keep in mind. India's nuclear doctrine. So India has a nuclear doctrine. This is also again a part of foreign policy. This is how India positions itself. So India has nuclear weapons, but it has a no first use policy. So India is positioning itself as a, let's say, peaceful nation in that sense that yes, we do possess nuclear weapons, but we don't want to use them. We don't want to be an aggressor. We want to keep them just to ensure we are not attacked. So we will not use it first. But if someone were to use nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction against us, then we will not hesitate. This has been India's stance. And this has actually positioned India as a very responsible nuclear power. So if you see, uh, if you see many think tanks and research papers and defense analysts, they always say that India is a responsible nuclear weapon state because India does not want to use its nuclear weapons for any leverage. It does not. There are many nations who, especially in our neighborhood, who say that for any small thing they would say we'll use nuclear weapons. That is very irresponsible statement. But India as a nation has said we will not use nuclear weapons, or we will not kind of make them a showpiece that if you do anything, we'll bomb you with nuclear weapons. We are a peaceful nation. We don't want to do aggression, so we will keep it just for our self-defense. And this has actually helped position India not just as a responsible nuclear power, but also in general as a very peace-loving and responsible great power in the world. Other important factors India has to keep in mind is conflict management with Pakistan and China. Because whenever a conflict breaks out, so usually we are very quick to say that, oh, just bomb them, attack them. But why do we not do them? Why do we go for diplomacy? Why do we go for peace and all of this? Because we need to grow economically. If we are fighting wars, investments will reduce in our nation. So we have to make sure our foreign policy is designed in a way to actually manage these conflicts, to actually ensure we don't even have to fight. If there are any problems, we can solve it through talkings and negotiations. And another strategic challenge that India faces. So you may have heard of the recent Red Fort blast in Delhi. Terrorism has been a very big issue for India. India is one of the countries that is worst affected by terrorism. And usually this terrorism is cross-border. So nations from outside fund and train these terrorists, the biggest funder and trainer being Pakistan, and send them to India to attack Indian civilians, Indian security forces. So India's foreign policy makes sure that it keeps terrorism also at the center. If you see a lot of talks with other nations does involve counter-terrorism operations and zero tolerance to terrorism. And India is very strict about this, that we will not tolerate any soft stance towards terrorism. Terrorism has to be looked at as an evil that cannot be tolerated no matter what. There can be no justification for terrorism. And if you see the 9/11 attacks that happened in US, India said we give unconditional support, no questions asked. Because there was a terrorist attack and we believe that we should not tolerate terrorism, we will give unconditional support to USA. So India has lived up to that stance. India has always been totally against terrorism. And India expects that from other nations. So when it deals with other nations, when it talks to them, it makes sure to make it a point to ask them to keep terrorism at the core of it. That we have to fight terrorism till the very end. And this is again the strategic approach that India takes to making its foreign policy. Now, you can see it's very complex. You have so many things, historical approach, strategic approach, and different approaches to actually make foreign policy. So it's not possible for a prime minister or a foreign minister to actually make these foreign policies. To just alone think that this is good for the nation, we'll go ahead and do this. There are different institutions, different number of people that actually sit down, think, discuss, debate, criticize, analyze, and then come to a conclusion as to what our policy should be. So some key institutions, and these are not the only institutions, mind you. There are different factors also, but these are key institutions, formal institutions that actually uh, decide what Indian foreign policy will look like. So MEA is the Ministry of External Affairs, and they do the formulation and execution of policy. So the policy documents that you may see, the 100, 200 pages of documents that you may see, MEA is the one that makes it and ensures that its execution is happening. So through embassies, through its diplomats, it makes sure that this policy is being executed. Another is Prime Minister's office. So the Prime Minister is a very important figure in the country. In our country, especially where there is a parliamentary form of democracy, the Prime Minister becomes a very important position. And many of the strategic decisions are taken by the Prime Minister's office. Mind you, we are not saying Prime Minister, we are saying Prime Minister's office. So a prime minister doesn't alone sit and think what to do. The office, so in the office there are diplomats who are experienced, who have been there for decades, who know how things work. There are other experts who advise the prime minister, and after that a decision is taken. And usually in prime minister's office, very big issues are discussed. So prime minister has other roles as well. The office has to perform other roles as well. So very strategic decisions, very high level of diplomacy actually happens through the prime minister's office. And then there are National Security Council. There is our intelligence wings such as RAW, IB. They too provide inputs to MEA, PMO, that what is the condition like, what could be our approach, the threats we face, and all of that. Then there are parliamentary committees that recommend, that kind of ask the government questions and provide information to the government. There are think tanks. Think tanks could be government think tanks, it could be private think tanks that actually do research, do analysis, and provide very great insights into what the scenario is on a global level, or what policies we can take to actually make a foreign policy better. Uh, embassies. So when we say we are maintaining, let's take example USA, maintaining good relations with USA. How do we do that? You know, the Prime Minister isn't calling the President of USA and saying, "How are you? We should do this. We should do that." There has to be constant negotiations, constant uh, presence on ground, and that happens through embassies. So India has embassies all around the world in different nations, and people working in embassies actually day in and day out work towards sending information, formulating policies, helping in formulation of policies and other things. And unlike USA, if you see in USA, a president changing means a very major shift in foreign policy can happen. So before this, if you see, India was supposed to be the most important uh, kind of partnership for USA in the 21st century, and India and USA friendship was unbreakable, this, that. And suddenly a president changes as Donald Trump comes. India and US relations have gone to an all-time low in many years now. So in many nations like USA, the policy is very much dependent on the president. But in India, that's not the case. While the prime minister has a lot of say, the bureaucracy in India, the bureaucrats, the IFS officers, and the other high-ranking officers provide some form of continuity. They, in India, you wouldn't see very sudden policy shifts. You wouldn't see just because government has changed, everything changes. Yes, there is an impact. A new prime minister does bring something new with them. But in general, if you see, the Indian policy has continuity to it. It doesn't change very randomly. So India's foreign policy is very stable and it evolves over time. Changes happen slowly, which is in many ways positive. Positive in the sense that countries can trust India. They know that one election will not change everything. They know that in 5 years everything won't change. If India has a certain policy, it will follow this policy for a long time. And that is institutional approaches. Economic approach. In today's day and age, economy is very important. So you may have a very strong military, you may have a very strong intelligence department, you may have a very strong national security umbrella, but if your economy is not growing well, your importance at the world stage will be very low. Your importance at the world stage will not be that high. If you take Singapore, for example, Singapore is no military power. Singapore does not have the means to even survive for a week if it comes to conflict. But Singapore is an economic powerhouse. And we all have heard of Singapore. It's a very tiny nation in the middle of nowhere. But its economic stature is so high that it is one of the most important nations in the world. A lot of, I would say, it has a lot of influence on global politics simply because of its economic might. And that's a theme of today's foreign policy for India and for other nations, that economic growth, economic future has to be taken into account. Economy has always been important, but in the globalized world, it is even more important. And for India, after 1991, it's become very important. After 1991, if you see, India opened up its economy for the world. We did the LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization, globalization. And it became very important for India to attract investments, do trade agreements, negotiate with nations for better trade deals. India also had to, India's energy needs increased, so India's energy security became even more important. So it became important for us to have very good, very healthy relations with US, Europe for investments, Japan for investments, with Middle East, Central Asia for energy needs and resources. For technology also, in the modern world, your economy will be very limited if your technology is not advanced. In the world of AI, 5G, and space, if your technology is not advanced, you wouldn't have a very important place in the world stage. India has a lot of problems. There is no denying that. There is a lot of poverty. Our cities, there's a lot of pollution and all of that. But India has made a lot of progress as well. If you see India Space Agency, it has put India on a global map, given a lot of importance to India, simply because we are technologically at an advanced stage in the space sector. And so it's very important. Today's technology partnership, technology advancement is very important. And so all this is kept into mind again while making foreign policy, that the trade should increase, investment should increase, technology transfers and partnerships should increase. That way, it makes us more relevant, more powerful, more important at a global stage. Just like the example of Singapore. So India already has a very strong military, very strong intelligence. India's economy is also doing very well, but it is very important for us to maintain relations, to build relations in a way that this economic progress can actually increase and go on for a very long time. And as you know, PM Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh were very important in bringing the 1991 reform that has actually pushed India to become a more important and economically more advanced nation in the world. And there are ideological approaches as well. We are a democratic nation, so we do prefer democracies, but we also have a policy of not interfering in other nations' policies. So if you see US, it talks about spreading democracy, it talks about bad dictatorships in certain nations, this and that. But India has maintained a policy where it does not interfere in other countries' matters. And in return, it expects people do not interfere in their India's internal matters. India also believes in South, global South solidarity, and in some ways, India is the leader of global South. India is a leader of developing nations in many ways. And so these are ideological approaches for India's foreign policy. Ideology keeps changing with time, keeps changing with needs, but this is, you can say, a basic framework to India's ideology. And okay, so decision making, how does the decision making take place? So we have seen all the economic approaches and all the other things, but how does decision making take place? So it does matter on the style of the prime ministers. It does matter on how assertive or how you'd say what kind of thinking the prime minister has. And you cannot box anything into right or wrong. Everyone brings in something unique, as we discussed earlier. So if we see Pandit Nehru, his idea of non-alignment, Panchsheel, this is kind of a very idealistic and very non-assertive way of approaching foreign policy. While Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had a realistic viewpoint. So if you see the War of 1971, in which Bangladesh came into being, it was very much dependent on the kind of thinking the Prime Minister had. And coincidentally, at that time, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was very assertive, very decisive that, okay, this is a national security threat for India, and thus India must do everything to liberate Bangladesh. So it matters on what the Prime Minister thinks, what how the Prime Minister approaches it. If you see Prime Minister Vajpayee, he thought it's very important for India to go nuclear and to also ensure that we can kind of build peace with Pakistan because we have to grow economically as well. We can't always be fighting. Even though the second policy did not work out very well, if you, as we all know, even till today, Pakistan remains hostile. But the nuclear policy was very important. India established its nuclear deterrent and it made it clear that we are not scared. So China may be growing, but we are not scared. We too have enough ways to defend ourselves. If you see the current Prime Minister, PM Modi, his diplomacy is very assertive. So the way we handle the issue with Pakistan, it's very assertive, his diplomacy. Uh, and there's a diaspora outreach. So this new kind of diplomacy where we give a lot of importance to diaspora, we try to get them involved in India's developmental process. So we are involving our own people living outside the nation to make progress come within the country. And then there are domestic factors like elections, public opinions. Uh, Public opinion is very important. This is a whole big topic of discussion. The video is already very long. We may not go into it now, but if you do need to understand this factor of how elections, public opinion, and different groups impact foreign policy, we can do that some other time. Non-alignment. So over this whole video, we have discussed about non-alignment, but it's basically, it talks about not going with any side. So during the Cold War, the world was divided between America and USSR, but India decided against going with either side. Nations had to choose whether they wanted to be with USSR or America, but India decided we'll go with neither. Or in some ways, we'll have good relations with both the nations. We'll not align ourselves with anyone. And this actually provided breathing space to many nations who were very confused how to approach this. India gave them the direction. India, along with Egypt, Yugoslavia, sorry, Indonesia, Ghana, they built this non-alignment movement where nations could choose not to go with either USSR and USA and have good relations with both. And this provided India leadership at the global stage, despite having limited power. Remember, we just got independence. We were economically at a very bad state. Partition just happened. Our political, economic condition, everything was very bad. We had food shortage, and yet India was able to gain some form of leadership at the global level because of this policy. Today, however, we have replaced it with multi-alignment. Uh, Multi-alignment basically says that we will cooperate more with both nations. So we will have defense ties, we will produce missiles with Russia as well, but we will also buy defense equipments from USA as well. And these two nations are still very much rivals. But India is multi-aligned. They are aligned with both the nations. So today, while we still don't declare military alliances with any nation, our policy has changed from non-alignment to multi-alignment. And this is a picture of the leaders involved in the non-alignment movement. And so contemporary approaches, we have already discussed this. Neighborhood first policy is giving importance to neighborhood. Act East policy is the nations in Southeast Asia like Vietnam, Indonesia, and other nations. We must more proactively engage with them and build better relations with them. Indo-Pacific vision. This is Indo-Pacific vision and Quad and strategic partnership is actually to do with our relations with US, Japan, Australia, and other nations here to in some ways counter China, to some ways counter China's influence and dominance. So India is very proactively trying to have relations with nations and build partnerships that help it counter China's rise in Asia. Because remember, it's all about your national interest. If you do not counter China, China may build the capabilities to hurt you, and you will not be prepared for it. So India is very proactively trying to build these relations and partnership to counter China and global South leadership to lead the developing nations and again to balance relations with US, Europe, Russia, and all of these nations. So this is the contemporary approaches. We have discussed all of this above. And today's changing global context, China is one very important factor here. China's growth does put in a lot of, I would say, strain on India. India's economic growth compared to China has been slow up until now. In many ways, economically at least, we are far behind. Militarily, our military is very much capable of defending our borders, but it's very important for us to increase our global influence, increase our influence, at least come to a point where it is of China's today. So the rise of China does put a lot of stress on India, but India is actively trying, and even though we need to do much more, but we are trying to kind of balance this. The world is shifting from unipolar to multipolar. Unipolar means one pole. One pole used to be the US, United States of America, which was the sole superpower. Even today, USA remains the sole superpower, but China has emerged as a strong nation. Not a challenger to USA yet, but a strong nation, and US cannot have its say as it likes. China is at a place globally where it can do a lot of things. Similarly, there are other nations like India and European nations that do not bow down to US power. So in that sense, we are shifting towards a multipolar world, which is perfect for India. India has always desired for a multipolar world, and we are steadily moving towards that. And climate change is another important issue. Cybersecurity, AI, technology is another important issue. Food security. India is a very big producer of grains and foods. So India uses grains as a diplomatic tool as well, sending aid and other things. Pandemic diplomacy means how we send vaccines to many nations. So we are also using this to strengthen our relations with other nations, build friendly relations with other nations. And India is also trying to grow its influence in other organizations like G20, BRICS, SCO, UN. We are also demanding the permanent seat in UN. So India is actively trying to grow its influence all around the world. In many ways, it has been successful. In many ways, a lot of work needs to be done. And these are things we have already discussed. India needs to keep growing economically. This is one point we have to keep in mind, that we have to keep growing economically, because that is our, you can say, our trump card. If India's economy stops growing, if India's middle class stops growing, if money in India stops pouring, India's relevance at the world stage will reduce drastically. India's economy is what makes it very relevant in today's context. Many nations see opportunity to earn more through India, through trade with India, through investments in India. And that is the reason why they are building very strong relations with India, be it USA, be it European nations. But if India's economy stops growing, India's relevance at the world stage will stop growing. So it's very important for us as people to focus on the right issues and ensure that we are focusing on economic growth rather than other not so necessary things that a lot of times we do in domestic politics. And that's about it. Once again, if you have come till here, I can assure you that your idea of foreign policy, and especially India's foreign policy, is very much clear. I would love your feedback, and also do consider subscribing. And if you have any topics related to political science or foreign policy where you'd want me to make videos, please drop a comment down. Thank you. Have a nice day.